Good afternoon, Ohio State fans. Thanks for tuning in with us today. We are live here with Matt Weaver from Peegs.com, the 247Sports Indiana site. I'm Patrick Murphy with Bucknuts and 247 Sports. We're going to talk a little Buckeyes and Hoosiers heading into this weekend's game. Matt, obviously a primetime game. So I guess the first thing, just kind of the mood around Bloomington heading into this weekend. We'll get into the Indiana's season in a minute, but just kind of the feel of Bloomington as the Buckeyes come to town for a night game on ABC.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of disappointment. They're 2-4, and I think everybody. I mean, the front half of this schedule was really tough for Indiana, but I think people had obviously much higher expectations after last season and the season before, where they had two pretty good years in a row. So it's people are down. There's a lot of disappointment, a lot of frustration, and it's kind of weird because when Kevin Wilson was the coach, the OC now there at Ohio State, Indiana could score with anybody. They'd score 35-40, but they'd give up 40-45. Right. Now the defense, and I know some of the stats are a little bit skewed, the defense has actually played pretty good this year, and the offense has just killed them. I mean, they're averaging 7 points a game in Big Ten play. They've scored one touchdown in 3 Big Ten games. It's just as bad as an offensive display as there's been. And Indiana's obviously had a lot of bad football, but I mean, the one thing they usually could do is score points. They just usually couldn't stop people. And now it's really weird. It's just totally reversed where they can't score at all, and the defense is just being put in such bad situations game after game.
Well, let's start on the offensive side of the ball and kind of break down, in your opinion, what's gone on with these struggles. I know there's been a good amount of injuries, both sides of the ball for the Hoosiers. Buckeye fans saw, I guess not in person because of the year we had last year, but saw last year what this Indiana offense could be when Michael Penick and Ty Freifogel came into the horseshoe and nearly upset the Buckeyes, especially in that second half when they made that frantic comeback. So what's different this year? Why haven't the Hoosiers been able to replicate that offensive performance that we saw last year?
It's hard to pinpoint one thing. It's honestly a number of different factors. I think the biggest thing is, and going back to Coach Wilson, he used to say it all the time when he was over here, and he's obviously a brilliant offensive guy, but this isn't, super knowledgeable stuff. You can only sorry, my cat just jumped up on the table.
All right.
You can only run plays that you can block for. And Indiana's offensive line has really struggled. So those explosive plays, and the offensive line wasn't great last year, but it was good enough to give Michael Penick enough time to take those downfield shots. And this year, that just hasn't been the case. They don't, to run those downfield plays, you got to give your quarterback a little bit more time to let the play develop and the guy get downfield. And they just haven't been able to do that. And then Michael Penick has, when he was playing, really, really struggled. It started right off the bat against Iowa, and it's continued in a number of other games. I mean, turnovers, just, inaccuracy, just not the same guy. And obviously he's had a number of injuries that's been well documented. I don't know if he's not 100% healthy, if it's become a mental thing because of the injuries, or if it's just a combination of all those things together. And then, Ty Freifogel and some of those guys have not made those plays, gotten those 50-50 balls. I mean, he did that against Ohio State. He did that against a lot of guys, a lot of teams last year. He was wide receiver of the year in the Big Ten. And then, in the red zone, the Cincinnati game, this team should be 4-2. They outplayed Cincinnati. They outplayed Michigan State. Against Cincinnati, they had the ball 3 times at the 10-yard line and closer and got 0 points. And then they've had some mistakes, with turnovers. And then Michigan State, you score 15 points. You really only gave up 13. 7 of the points Michigan State got was on a pick 6. So it's just a complete failure on offense. It's really, like I said, if it was one thing, I think you could probably get it turned around a little bit. There's so many things going wrong that I think it's just kind of snowballed out of control.
Yeah, it's interesting just watching Indiana, this year and then more so this week. It doesn't look like the same team offensively, especially you talked about Michael Penick, and he's a guy who I thought coming into the season would be a reason this offense would kind of take off healthy again. At least it looked that way coming into the year. And I really liked what I saw from him when he played last year. And, you're right. It doesn't look the same to me from an outsider looking in. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think that's been probably the biggest issue is that, they expected him to really take that next step and build on what he did last year. And it just hasn't happened. Is that an appropriate read?
Yeah, and you saw it. I mean, in that Ohio State game, Indiana, I think, literally had like negative 2 or 3 yards rushing. They had like 500 or close to 500 or 400 yards passing. I can't remember the exact number. He literally put him on his back and carried him when I think it was 35-7 when they made that big comeback. And obviously he had the poor throw that was taken back. I think it was Sean Wade that returned that pick six, but he played really well in Ty Freifogel. And that's just not from the get-go, the Iowa game, you could see that. I mean, even against Idaho, which, nothing against Idaho, but that's a game where I could probably throw for 100 yards. He was 11 out of 16 for like 68 yards. So even though the percentage was pretty good, there was no downfield. It was all dump offs and short throws. I mean, there's just been I looked at the stats, and Indiana's like dead last in, plays of 10 yards or more. Last year, they were in the top half of the league. And They don't have the athletes that Ohio State does, but they've got good enough guys that they should be getting more explosive plays. Now, they've lost some guys, DJ Matthews, David Ellis, to injuries, who really could provide those kind of plays, but they still have enough guys that they should be getting a little bit more, and it's just not happening. And like I said, in fairness to Michael Penix, he got no help from the running game. So it was like that last year. And then this year, I think it just kind of is everything that could go wrong has kind of gone wrong. And he wasn't as sharp, and he's just a phenomenally talented guy. And it's a shame to see his season go like this, because he's worked really hard to come back. And quite honestly, he deserved better, and the offense deserved better. But it's just kind of spun out of control. And I think they're almost at the point where you're kind of grasping for straws. You're throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks.
When coming into this game, it sounds like Michael Penix could play. What's the status at quarterback? And if he doesn't play, fill Ohio State fans in on what would be the options behind him, as I know there's been a couple guys that might get looks.
Yeah, today we had a Zoom call with Tom Allen at 11:30, and he said Donovan McCauley is their number 2 quarterback. So if he's the number 2 quarterback, then Jack Tuttle is going to start.
Yeah,
I don't expect Michael Penix to play. I guess something crazy could happen, but I think he probably does not play. And Jack Tuttle, who is a highly teammate of Chris Olave out in California. In fact, I think if I know the story right, Ryan Day found Chris Olave because he was recruiting Jack Tuttle and saw him play, and that's when they started recruiting him. So, but he's got ability. He hasn't played a ton. They don't seem, when he plays, they don't seem to try to take the shots downfield that they do with Michael Penix. Now, maybe I don't know if that's him or the play calling or a little bit of both, but he's a very smart guy. The first drive last week against Michigan State, he looked good. He went into Wisconsin last year, first start, and beat Wisconsin up there. And I know it's not been a vintage Wisconsin team the last couple of years, but that's not an easy place to play, even when there's no fans, and they've got a great defense. So he's done some good things. Doesn't have the talent that Michael Penix does, but that's not a knock on Jack. He's a talented kid. It's just Michael Penix has, really, really high ability when everything's working right. Donovan McCauley, I think, will play some. He's a true freshman from Indianapolis, 4-star guy. Big, athletic, more of a dual threat. They brought him in last week and had him run the ball almost like a wildcat. He kind of ran the ball like a wildcat, but he can throw. He's got a really good arm. I don't know how much he got like 3 or 4 snaps against Michigan State. I'm not sure you're going to want to throw him out there for, 10, 15 snaps against Ohio State and the kind of athletes they're going to bring to the field. But he could do some things if he's given an opportunity. So I think Jack Tuttle takes the majority of the snaps, but, I could see McCauley getting some time here and there if they see the opportunity to use him.
You mentioned the run game, and it wasn't a huge part of Indiana's offense against Ohio State last year. It clearly has not been big this year. Is it the offensive line? What is it that this running game can't get going for the Hoosiers?
Yeah, they just don't do a great job of getting a push. And, they got a transfer running back, Stephen Carr from USC, who was a big-time recruit out of high school. He kind of had some injuries at USC. He was coached by Dylan McCullough at USC, and transferred over here for his final year. He's done a nice job. He's got some ability. He's a talented guy. There's not a lot of holes there. He's probably, he has to break. He's getting hit a lot at the line of scrimmage. They don't get a great push. I mean, the best way I can describe it, there's no holes there. And, they've got good players, but they don't have, Travion, was it Henderson, I think is his name. That guy's a freak. You could put him behind a mediocre line, he could still be pretty good. Put him behind Ohio State's line, and he's an absolute stud. So, it's just a combination of things. Last year, they didn't run the ball well. They pass protected pretty good, and Michael Penix's ability to get the ball out quick really helped and know where he was going. This year, like I said, he's struggled with that, and then they struggled to block, and then with no run game, I mean, you're second 9, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8 in the Big Ten. I don't care who you're playing. Even bad teams are going to give you problems because it's hard to always be behind the sticks when you're playing in a league like the Big Ten, even against the teams that are at the bottom of the conference.
You mentioned Ty Freifogel a couple times, and you said he hasn't made some of the plays he made a year ago. As you said, this was the Big Ten Receiver of the Year, a guy who NFL teams were talking about in an exciting manner. I know you need a quarterback to get you the ball, but as you said, he hasn't made some of the plays he did make for a quarterback last year. Is it a regression for him? Is it that the plays haven't been there? What do you see when you look at why he hasn't had a second consecutive big year at the receiving position for Indiana?
I don't think it's a physical thing. And Ty is a hard worker. They talk him, you see him in practice, and it's hard to explain. I think it almost become mental. I think everybody's struggling. I think it's just, like I said, it's kind of spun into a big snowball that's like turning into an avalanche. And not to make excuses for them, because these are college guys and they're playing at a big time level. And some of these guys, they want to go on to the next level. So you got to fight through it. But it just hasn't happened. He's had a problem with drops this year, which he's never really had a problem with before. We saw him. He's made some really tough catches, and not every receiver catches every single ball, but it's been more of an issue this year for and not just him. There's been other guys who've had drops, but in the Cincinnati game, it was a big issue, especially in the second half. He dropped some balls that really could have helped him maybe pull that game out. So, I think it's just become mental. Him and Penick are really close. They're very close off the field, and I don't know if Penick's struggles. It's kind of like combined into one with him. It's a shame because he came back and had such a great year last year, and obviously it's just gone so sideways for not just Ty Freifogel but the entire offense.
Well, let's shift over to the defensive side of the ball. As you mentioned, maybe the numbers don't tell the whole story here, and Ryan Day talked about that this week. That Indiana's played some good teams, and today on his radio show he listed off the ranked teams that have beaten Indiana, and it was kind of eye-opening. You look at the record, and maybe you don't see that. So defensively, we know that this Hoosiers team last year really pressured Ohio State well, caused Justin Fields to turn the ball over quite a few times, something he didn't do a lot throughout his 2 years at Ohio State. A younger quarterback in C.J. Stroud now behind center. You mentioned Travion Henderson. What do you see as Indiana's successes on the defensive side of the ball, and what do they have to do in your eyes against Ohio State?
Well, I think they got to get pressure. I don't think they've blitzed as much this year. I mean, I don't have the numbers, but they don't seem to have blitzed as much this year as they did last year. They did that a lot against Ohio State, sending Micah McFadden up the middle, Tywan Mullen off the edge, or somebody else. Their front four, they've got a couple guys, transfers from SEC programs, Ryder Anderson from Ole Miss and Jaron Handy from Auburn, who, actually are pretty decent pass rushers, and they've not really had that before. So they're able to generate a little bit more pressure at their front four. They did blitz Michigan State some. But I think that's what they got to do. Yeah, the strength of their defense really is their linebackers, Micah McFadden, Cam Jones, and then their secondary. Now, and we might get to this later, but, Reese Taylor and Tywan Mullen, two of their better, Tywan Mullen's an All-American, a terrific player, and Reese Taylor is this guy who they basically play three starting corners. They start two, but basically all three of them are starters. They rotate them and move them around. Reese Taylor's been out, so we don't know what their availability is going to be. I think it'll be a game time type of decision. Okay. So that could affect how they call the game. Now against Michigan State, they put their corners out on the island, and they tried to keep Kenneth Walker, and they did a really good job against Michigan State's offense. I would expect they'll probably try to do that this week. The scary thing is Michigan State's got good receivers, but they're not Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. And if you put guys in man coverage on them all day long, it could be really, really, it could get ugly, because if you don't get to Stroud and he's got time to throw and that O-line's really good, those guys are going to get open. I don't care if you got Deion Sanders out there. They're going to get open at some point because they're really good. I mean, they're NFL guys. So I think they'll probably take some chances. They probably have to blitz Stroud. Hope he makes some freshman mistakes. It looks like he's been pretty good this year for the most part. So, but I don't know that you can just sit back and zone or, drop 7 or 8 guys, because I think those guys, there's too many weapons. And if you give him all day to throw, somebody's going to get open. So I think you got to try to speed him up and hope that he makes some mistakes.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because early in the season, he had interceptions in each of his first 3 games and some kind of boneheaded throws. He hasn't done that the last few weeks, but he played Akron, Rutgers, and Maryland. So, I'm not sure the level of competition there. I want to ask you more about the defense, because obviously Tom Allen, head coach, is a defensive guy, but new defensive coordinator, Charlton Warren this year.
Mhm.
Sorry. What has he brought? Is this still Tom Allen calling the defense, or is it more a mix? How do they kind of handle who makes the decisions on defense with Tom Allen as the head coach?
Yeah, Coach Allen, he gave up play call. Now he had Kane Womack, and Kane Womack and him
Right.
went back to their Ole Miss days. He actually learned this defense from Kane Womack's dad. I think it's Dave Womack at Ole Miss. And then Kane Womack had been a DC at lower levels, but he had been a play caller before. Whereas Charlton Warren, I think he'd only done it once, and it would have been a number of years ago. Um, and Kane Womack was the play caller last year, pretty much all by himself. I think Warren is pretty much calling this year. I'm sure there's input. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know how they do it at Ohio State with the OC. Kevin Wilson's obviously a very good offensive guy, but I'm sure Ryan Day has a ton of input because he's a great offensive coach. So, and he's the head coach. But I don't know that there's really a whole lot of different. I don't think they're blitzing as much. It's still the same 4-2-5 defense. A lot of it looks the same. The one thing they've done a little bit different, they started doing this last year. One of their ends, they kind of stand up. They call it the bowl. They still play a 4-man front, but it's almost like a 3 guys with their hands down and 1 guy kind of standing up. It's not a 3-4, but it kind of looks like that a little bit.
Gotcha.
Usually it's an athletic guy from anywhere from like 230 to 250. They have some different body types and depending on the situation. And I think it's worked pretty good. Like I said, they've been better at rushing the pass without blitzing this year. But the defense is really not changed. Well, this is Tom Allen's baby. They may tweak it depending on who the DC is, and obviously, like you said, Charlton Warren. But it still looks a lot of the same. The biggest thing they have not done this year on defense, and they played well, is they haven't gotten the turnovers. I think they were second or third in the Big Ten in turnover margin. 17 picks, I think, in 8 games, which is really incredible. 3 or 4 fumble recoveries. This year, I think they've got 8 through 6 games, 8 total, 4 of each. And then obviously they turn the ball over so much, they're in the minus on the turnover margin. So that's the one thing they haven't done as well, which is obviously hard to do every year in and year out. But overall, like I said, this defense has played good enough for Indiana to be 6-0. Not saying they should be 6-0, but they've kept them in pretty much every game. Even the Penn State game was 24-0. It was 14-0 more than halfway through the third quarter. The offense just did absolutely nothing. And that defense is, at some point, you're going to wear out. It's just too hard to keep shutting teams down, especially at Penn State, who's got some obviously good players. So they've done pretty good. This is Tom Allen's defense, but it's Charlton Warren's leading it. And I'm sure he's done some tweaks, but it's nothing significant that really jumps off the page for you.
Okay. I got 2 more things for you. The first one is if you're going to pinpoint a couple keys for Indiana to be offensively, defensively, to get the upset in this game, what would it be?
Well, offensively, they've got to do something. They've got to get some big plays. They've got to have a couple of explosive plays. They don't have to have like an 80-yard touchdown, but you've got to have a play where, like, if you're on your 25, you get a play and you go down to like Ohio State's 20, or like a 50, 40, 50, 60-yard play that puts you in position. And then if you get in the red zone against them, you got to get touchdowns. They've been awful at scoring touchdowns this year in the red zone. Defensively, I think you've got to get some turnover. You've got to win the turnover margin. You can't, it can't be even, or you definitely can't lose it. You have no chance. Even if you win the turnover margin, it's going to be hard. But if you can get some turnovers and maybe they lead directly to points, maybe it's a pick that gets you deep in Ohio State's territory, or you get a fumble, when they start a drive and you're at like their 20 or 25, stuff like that. And then I think I'll throw special teams in there. You don't have to maybe score on special teams, but you got to win the field position battle. You can't be starting from the 10 and Ohio State starting from, their 40. It's got to be the other way around. And if you can get a big play, a big return that kind of flips the field or puts you in good position. And then obviously, Ohio State special teams are so good. They got so many great athletes. It's going to be tough to hold them down. But I don't want to say a perfect game because there's no such thing, but you've got to play as close to a perfect game as you can, because this team, where they average 48.5 points a game. And you mentioned some of the teams they play, but still 50 points a game is 50 points a game. It's like they're like a video game. I mean, they're really well coached with great players.
Obviously, last year had the Hoosiers been able to pull off that upset and stay undefeated, it would have been big for the program. But given how this year's gone, given that Indiana has not beaten Ohio State, I think it's 1988 was the last time. Mm-hmm. If they're able to pull up this upset night game, as we talked about earlier, I know it hasn't been the year that everyone hoped, but what would that do for the program? Maybe not long-term. Maybe I don't know if we want to go into program-defining type performances, but just for this year and maybe turning things around, or at least getting some good feelings back. An upset win here, what would that mean?
Well, it would be for me. It would be the biggest win IU football's had in a long time. I mean, I'm talking maybe back to the '80s or something like that when Bill Mallory was the coach. I mean, they've had some big wins since then, but you know, it's because of the circumstances. You're 2-4. I mean, if you were playing better, 5-1, 4-2, maybe even 6-0, and you were kind of expected to really, obviously it'd still be a big win, but the season's gone so sideways for Indiana that a win like this would be huge. It would be huge because it's just I don't think a lot of people expect them to be really in this game. I think the defense can play pretty well for a while, but if the offense is doing what they've been doing all year, the defense is going to wear out, and this Ohio State team is too good offensively. So an upset would be a monumental win. It would be the biggest win, in my opinion, of Tom Allen's. And I know he's not been here long, but it would be the biggest win of his time at Indiana.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, well, thank you, Matt. Thank you, everyone who's tuned in. Whether you listen to this live, listen to it after the fact, we appreciate it. Matt, we'll see you in Bloomington this weekend. We're making the trip up Saturday, so we'll be there.
Give yourselves plenty of time. The traffic is brutal with the construction.
Yeah, we've made it through Indianapolis a couple times already this year, so we're looking into that. Appreciate your time. Thanks for talking some Buckeyes, some Hoosiers with us. Thanks again, everyone tuning in. I'm Patrick Murphy, Matt Weaver we're both at 247 Sports. Thanks again. We'll talk to you after the game on Saturday night.